Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us in this studio and online. I'm happy to see all of you here in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. My name is Olha Atamanova, and today we will be talking about an important topic, the topic dedicated to the opportunities for development of communities during the full-scale invasion. It's no secret to all of us that during this war, one of our advantages that everybody is talking about, that is highlighted to everybody, is the reform of local governance, specifically decentralization. But at the same time, during the full-scale invasion, all of our town communities were facing certain types of challenges that we will be discussing now. So joining us online is Bohdan Kelichavay, head of Kopychynetsk town territorial community in Ternopil region. Right by my side are Ksenia Alekankina, head of Reform Index project in Vox Ukraine, and Halyna Skipalska, country director at HealthRight International Ukraine. Good afternoon, dear friends. Good afternoon, Mr. Bohdan. I hope you're seeing and hearing us. So for all of us, we know that all the bodies of local government, they were conditionally divided into three groups. We understand there are territorial communities which are currently under temporary occupation or were deoccupied just recently. It's one group. Another significant group is the communities which are incessantly shelled, where the security situation is very complicated. And the third group of communities are those who are facing with a lot of internally displaced persons. They receive many such people. The number of such people is increased manifold. So Mr. Bohdan, what were the challenges that were faced by your community and how do you solve them? Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes, we are hearing you loud and clear. Thank you for this invitation. Well, my community is located in Ternopil region, and its population before the war, before the full-scale invasion, amounted to 13,500 inhabitants. With the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we started facing a number of challenges, and we keep facing them now, including psychological challenges, psychological pressure, both on us and the population, because we don't have a lot of plans for actions, what to do in this situation. So it's the first time we're facing something like this. So one of the challenges is lack of definition, and there are some questions which are interesting from organizational point of view, but from emotional point of view it's kind of difficult. So receiving internally displaced persons, our community was not quite ready for that, but we're trying to handle this problem. We try to support the people to make them feel comfortable here, and now it's way more difficult to imagine our community without those people who now play a significant role in the life of our community. Also, we send people to war. It's difficult. We have heroes who perished. It's 9 heroes and about 5 people, according to the information I have, they are missing in action. We try to cooperate with their families. We plan some projects in this regard, and there are projects that were planned before, but the country has changed its priorities. It's clear, but at the same time, you know, the voters, they expect for those projects to be implemented. So we're kind of living in a country which wages a war. Everybody understands it, but at the same time we have people's expectations that something should be happening with the same pace or maybe even faster. So still we have to find resources to ensure proper development of the community. So we expect for funding from the donors, from international organizations that work with us. So Mr. Bohdan, do you manage to integrate the internally displaced persons in the life of community to get them engaged in the project that you try to implement even during the war? Well, I would say that integration is happening in a number of phases or cycles. So first we're talking about people who need to have their basic necessities covered when they're in some shocked state, shocked condition. We need to provide them with a psychosocial support. We do it in our community and in the region. We have many international donors working in a region, but the next phase is the socialization. We work in this area too. We try to segregate, or we try to move people from places of compact dwelling, and we try to draw the attention of the donors that people should live in separate houses, separate apartments. And now we try to coordinate it with the owners of the houses which are in bad condition and no one lives there. So we agreed with the owners. We invest in their private houses, and in exchange they lease those houses for the internally displaced persons for free for a year. And sometimes we may talk about bailout, and this is how we integrate those internally displaced persons to our community. We try to create normal life conditions for them. And the last moment is the jobs. We employ people both in our community, in the administration. For example, our chief medic is from Donetsk region. We have an accountant from Kharkiv region. So in our institutions we have a lot of international cooperation, and many people get engaged in that type of work. We have a psychologist from Kherson region. So there are many moments when people who want to get employed, they choose our community because there are jobs available here, and they make decisions based on that, and only then they cover their other needs. We have farmers from eastern regions. They brought both their managers here, and they hire local people here, including the internally displaced ones. I cannot help but asking about the future. On the example of your community, do people plan to stay with you, or they plan to come back to their homes? Those changes that you are about to implement, are they going to have the systemic nature? Are they going to be for long, or those are temporary changes that could be recoiled after the people are ready to go back home? Well, it's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes there are people from the territories that are already deoccupied and they stay with us so far, but there are people who keep talking about coming back to their homes. I think it depends on how much time would pass and to what extent they would be integrated in the life of our community, whether they see future with us. But at the same time, we cannot set any obstacles to make sure that people don't come back home in no case. And we even think that people who take active part in development of our community, we work on it on a level of idea. We would like to help them to rebuild their communities. And when we talk about the international partnerships that we have now with different sister cities, with different countries, we can create such a chain of partnerships, like 2 Ukrainian cities and one deoccupied city and one city from the west. They enter into partnership with another 2 European cities. So in future, well, I have to be optimistic, and I have to express this optimism. I have to translate it to people. I have to hope for the best, and I have to create all the conditions to make sure that the people feel comfortable in the community, because it's not about keeping people with our community or not, but it's about whether they stay in the country, because You know, there are cases when people live abroad and now they're coming back, and sometimes there are people who left way before the war, before the full-scale invasion, and now they're coming back because they see some prospects. So it's important to have in our political system, in our economic system, to have our people here, no matter what is the community. We are like a screen that tries to keep the most people possible to make sure they feel comfortable here. Thank you very much. Thank you for this information. Ms. Ksenia, the question will be to you. Do our communities have enough legal leverage to implement those changes and to respond normally to the challenges that they're facing? Within the last year, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we've counted 165 reforms, and only 5 of them were related to decentralization. It's very little number, but we understand the challenges that are faced by the communities, the internally displaced people, the relocated businesses which they have to help to adapt, to integrate into the life of community. That's a small number again, and the sad number is that the Ukrainians themselves do not understand the meaning of the communities. 90% of the Ukrainians, they say that they know about decentralization, but only 9% said that it's about top reforms. So we would like to emphasize that this reform, it requires more attention, because the communities have the tax proceeds, they have financial instruments, but again the pressure is growing on them due to the growing necessities. So we have to delegate more authorities to the local governments, because the central government has more challenges to deal with, and that will become the fundamental for our resilience when not everything is being decided in Kiev, when the things are being decided on the local level. So what are the changes that need to be implemented, even no matter that we live in during the martial law, even in a view of all the challenges that we're facing, because as you said, we understand that those things are fundamental for us. Well, now we're in discussion about the proceeds to local budgets, to the distribution of taxes. It's an important question, because many people live not at places of their registration, and they may be paying taxes by place of their registration, and the communities that accept them, they do not have enough financing, enough funding. So I think we should work out the issue how to make the communities more financially independent. Ms. Halyna, the question will be to you. So we were talking about the communities that accept a large number of internally displaced people within the last 15 months of the full-scale invasion. So what are the changes that need to be made to change lives in those communities to the best? I want to emphasize, first of all, that the internally displaced persons are primarily women and children, and it's important to focus on that. Obviously, such people are also people with limited abilities, or the elderly and other vulnerable categories of population which require special attention, special focus, and special needs. Also important is to mention that now the communities keep talking about those who come back from Europe. According to the statistics of the United Nations organization, there is a significant number of those who come back to the accepting communities and getting registered there as internally displaced persons, and sometimes they counter the communities from that category that you named first, which are close to the forward edge of the battle area or close to the deoccupied territories. So what's important to mention is that a large number of internally displaced persons, they were subject to some crimes or cruel treatment by the Russian military. We have to understand that it's a traumatic experience that should be worked with. We should develop those services in the communities to have the healthy inhabitants. And the next the next challenge is the war that is still going on, and is the security issues, the absence of light, absence of power supply, the part of the territories which still remain without electric power supply, is the transportation security, security in the streets, that first of all is of threat to the women and children. So we keep saying that the community should have gender-oriented, gender-sensitive services to be developed for that category of population, and that those services, they talk a lot about the psychosocial support, because according to the assessment of the expert, 1 in 4 Ukrainians after the 15-month war, even without occupation, even without undergoing some trauma, still requires psychological support. In the same way, such psychological support is required by internally displaced persons, and first of all the women. I would like to agree with my colleague and to support the communities. What's important also is to focus on the moment of economic capacities, because when people make money, when they are engaged in some processes, they have a regular income. The families can go out of the compact dwelling areas and they may rent a room or an apartment. It can be made with the support of the social workers, qualified social workers, but this economic component is a very important component. This is what's said by the donors who support humanitarian projects in the communities of Ukraine, because of the jobs, because of the proper distribution of funding incoming to communities. It can serve as the funds for development of businesses, and even women who left for European countries. Well, I'm not talking about the father countries, because it's difficult to take that decision to come back promptly from the countries far away, but from Europe they will be coming to their communities to develop the economy there. So this is one of the most important moments of integration of the internally displaced people in the communities. Mr. Bohdan, if you are still with us, so this question will be probably to you. We understand that for any manager of the territorial community, as Ms. Halyna mentioned, it's very important to have that part of the people who can be economically independent, who develop their businesses in your communities, who provide jobs there to the local population. Do you have cases like that in your community? Who was able to either relocate their business to your community or to establish their business there in your community? And by that economic factor, very important is the social factor. To what extent are the communities ready to support our internally displaced persons with the education services, medical services, kindergartens, for example? To what extent are you able to respond to such challenges? Thank you for this question. So starting from the end, medicine or education benefit from it, because in the system of coordinates of our state, now the money follows the patient, and now there are people who can be studied or medically treated, and it's even of benefit to the small communities, because due to the small number of patients, sometimes the hospitals are being closed in the small communities. So on the background of this crisis that was going on in Ukraine for the last decades, I think there is no problem in this area. The only thing I should mention is the shelters. We've already coped with that challenge on the basic level. I would say we've equipped the shelters here. As to the economic capacities, this is the area where we should continue developing. And talking about relocated businesses, they deal with manufacturing of office furniture, and in their niche they were one of the biggest in Ukraine and quite successful and up-to-date manufacturing capacities. So their business suffered a lot during the war. For a long time they found themselves in the middle between Russian and Ukrainian armed forces, and when they had to come to us, they procured a building and they required a lot of resource to renew their operations. They were able to bring something from occupation, and they were feeling difficult to restart their business, but now they have orders. Even we ordered some furniture from them for our kindergarten. So they're facing still some challenges, a lot of challenges, because they're not back on that level that they were working on before, but they make it. And when there are some programs or grants, we try to support them, because you have to read them very carefully. But for example, when they went to the bank for a loan, they were asked to produce some proofs of their capabilities. What was your turnover capital within the last 3 years? And they said back in 2022 we had less turnover costs, so the bank was not able to respond them properly, and they were not able to get that loan. You know, there are a lot of stones you stumble upon, but we try to find ways out of the situation together. And at this phase, we are those who come, they see that it's a good business, quite a high tech with proper management. They hire people, they have work to do, they provide the jobs for the others, and they pay taxes here. And as to the place of registration of the businesses and payment of taxes, you know, it's a matter subject to discussion. You know, it's 50-50. It's being considered by all the communities, so it's difficult to reach any agreement there. But when the private entrepreneurs could pay 2% instead of 5%, I would say that the west of Ukraine did not suffer in this regard, and some private entrepreneurs switched to 2%, and it doesn't always make sense. Like in the beginning of this press conference, we said that we may look at different regions of Ukraine in a different way, depending on how to what extent they suffered from Russian aggression, so that we don't lose our economic potential and only continue developing our economy. Dear colleagues, if you have any questions, please go ahead. Good afternoon. You have quite an interesting biography. You were working in Kiev, Dnipro, Canada, and you made your choice to the benefit of Ukraine when you were nominated for the for this office of the head of local community. Don't you regret it? Do you manage to implement all of your ideas that you were planning? And if you don't, so why? Is it a lack of some legislation, or is it a lack of some mechanisms? In case it was up to you, how would you improve the process of decentralization? Thank you for this question. No, I do not regret. I think Ukraine has quite a good chance to develop. We are in focus of all the events. I have some international background before, and I was quite active. I'm trying to be active in the international arena in terms of local governance. I see feedback from my international colleagues. I see prospects of our country at this very moment. This is the place to be for the people who want development, who want professional development for themselves, and who want to develop their country. Regarding the plans, we have the program, and we try to adhere to this program. We try to implement the ideas that we were planning, and the most complicated even ones we still manage to implement them. And something intermediate is something that we planned in the beginning of 2022, which is not in line with the program, but more like operational plans, where we were co-financing some projects with the central government. We have not managed to do it due to the obvious reasons, but we try to find more opportunities. When you, for example, work with donor organizations, you cannot take into account only your interest. You have to put yourselves in the donor's shoes. You have to understand what they need, and you have to achieve the win-win result in any situation. So obviously it requires a lot more effort to implement your program, because you do like 80% what the donor wants and 20% of what your community wants. So it's important to have your team of people, and if you have them, you manage to do all of it. So I think in this regard everything will be fine. We will continue implementing our plans. As to the improvement of decentralization reform, what can I say? One of the biggest reasons, well, after I came back to Ukraine, I was more interested in local governance. And when I've seen this reform happening, I've seen the level of support of this reform by international organizations, international donors. We've taken the decision to come back to Ukraine from Canada with my wife. But if you submerge into details, there is a lot of complicated things that can be changed. But I think that the reform is quite successful when I compare it, when I communicate with other communities or communities of other countries. I see that we have more authorities. For example, like last week I was talking to the French in the Parliament of Romania, and so you see a town there, and there are 6 more levels of administration above them. On the other hand, in our system, it's my personal thought, we have a lot of discussions about that. In many developed countries of the world, there is such an office as a city manager. It's not a political office, it's just a manager responsible for all the operation processes in the community, and they segregate strategic and political role versus operational. In our case, it all boils down to one office of mayor, and even deputy mayors, they are sort of political because they offer the decisions to be approved during the sessions, and they act during until the very end of the cadence of the mayor. We can discuss a lot here, but I don't think we have enough time for that. Thank you very much for your answer. We have another question. Just one small question. You mentioned that before the invasion there were 13.5 people living in the community. So what is the population of the community now? Well, now it's growing. It's difficult to estimate the number of internally displaced people. I think that it's about 750 of them left. Not all of them want to get registered. Many people just live here due to a number of reasons. And yes, we have a number, the amount of population grown a little bit. You can see it from more shops opening, from more business activities going on. It's not very comfortable for me to say so, because many communities, they are in different circumstances, in the different conditions. But even no matter all the complications, the blackouts, the fact that our warriors, including those ones from our community, they protect us, we still manage to talk about the development of the community. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for this conversation. I hope that our communities will develop no matter what, and we will be able to see it in our experience. And in a couple of minutes we will have the presentation of the research about the activities of Russians who limit the access of the Ukrainians to Ukrainian information field in temporarily occupied territories. So stay tuned. Work together for our victory and glory to Ukraine.
Хлопець, ми хотіли з ним інтерв'ю зробити, бо я про нього прочитала, так там просто фантастика. Треба їхати у відрядження. Дякую, дякую.
Тим, хто не вверх,